Hello, Ron here. Today I am going to cook a big red brisket. First time for the big red brisket. Did a brisket last week, turned out really good, but I have heard from a barbecue expert, I'll call him an expert, that said one of the best briskets that they had ever made was with big red injected into the brisket upon wrapping. So it's not initially injected into the brisket, but it's done when it comes time to wrap. So 180 degrees internal, something like that. Just bought this brisket at Costco. It is it's a prime brisket, and it is $72.24, $4.19 a pound, which by today's standards is not bad, but this should trim up well, and we'll go to trimming in just a second. But let's get started on a big red brisket. So this brisket weighs out just over 17 pounds, so 17 and a quarter pounds, and it looks like the trimming process is not going to be real involved. Of course, it does have the Beckel fat that needs to come off, but the rest of it looks pretty good. So thanks to Matt at Meat Church for teaching me how to trim a brisket. So we'll see if that indeed is the case when we get the finished product. But the Beckel fat has to go. And some briskets, if you get a Packer brisket, or even a select brisket, you're not really getting that big of a bargain, because by the time you've trimmed that brisket out, you're going to have a lot of waste. So we're going to try to minimize this waste as much as we can. But the fact that it's a prime makes that process a whole lot easier. You need to have a sharp knife, obviously. Again, the key is that you want this to be as aerodynamic as you can get it. So I'm going to probably do a little arc here. And yeah, you do end up taking off some meat that otherwise would be good. But more importantly, it's more important that you have an aerodynamic edge. So after you've trimmed the brisket, that's step one. Step two is probably the most important step, and that's adding the seasoning. The Holy Cow rub is kind of the staple. This is fantastic. Another one that I suggest is again, it's a Meat Church product, but Texas Sugar. This gives a sweet taste. So you want to use the Texas Sugar sparingly, but the majority of what you're going to put down is the Holy Cow. And you want to start covering this brisket with the rub. I suggest just slowly shaking the container above it, making sure that you get an even distribution of the rub on the meat. Now what I'm going to do is now add a little bit of the sugar, because that's what really gives a really fantastic flavor. Again, sparingly with this because it does give a sweet flavor. So now what I do is let that set for 15 minutes or so to soak into the, you can also pat it, and that increases the amount of rub that's going to adhere to the meat. But what really is going to make that happen is letting it wait, letting it rest here before we do the other side. About 15 minutes to get that good and soaked into the meat. And you can see now, you can see a lot of the rub, but when we come back in 15 minutes, you'll see that starts to glaze over, and you'll start to get a sheen on the top. That means that the fat from the brisket has come to the top of the rub. That's really what you want to do before you turn it over and do the other side. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, and as you can see, this rub is set in pretty good on the meat side. I'm going to flip it over, and I will say this. I don't use any binder on the meat side of the brisket because, number one, that's going to be sitting on top for me. Number two, it's where you really want to make sure that the binding or the rub sits in is on the edges and on the fat side. So we'll flip this thing over. And I'm going to put French's mustard. So you put on a heaping amount of that and just rub that in. Just rub that in to this fat side and the edges. Be sure to get the edges, because that's the place that you're going to have the most trouble getting the seasoning to set up. So once you get the fat side well covered in the mustard, you get a little extra. Put it out there, and this is going to be for the edges. This brisket has some really nice looking edges on the meat. So looking forward to this having a good bark. Make sure everything is covered. A little bit more on the edges over here. Just like so. A little bit more on this feeding into the point, because that is the most vulnerable to drying out because of the thickness of it. Again, when you're picking out a brisket, there's a whole bunch of them in the freezer there. They're all labeled prime, but I'll guarantee you that the difference between a lot of them is that this flat will be half of this size. So get one that has a good, thick flat. So I'm going to let that set for about another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and make sure that I get the edges, and I'm going to get them with the Texas sugar. Okay, so it's been 10 more minutes, and you can see again that the rub is adhered well to this fat side, because number one, we've given it time to adhere, but number two, the binding. So we want to make sure that the binding is on the edges. Okay, I did put some on there, as you remember, but I'll put a little bit more, because really critical that these edges get good bark and get coated well. Just amazed at that thickness of that flat, because that's critical. I just want you to see that flat. It really is a very nice brisket. Very rarely do you find a brisket at a Costco or HEB or wherever you get your meat that has a flat that is that thick, and that makes all the difference in the world. So that is exactly what we wanted. The temperature of the grill, I think I said 200. It's just a little over 200. When you get your thermometer set up, I'm going to have probe number 1. In my case, is going to go in the flat. Shove it in, make sure it's in good. And then the second one is going to go in the point. So that is where I set the temperatures, or the thermometers. Then we close the door and we wait. Okay, so it's about 3 hours into the cook. So it's time to spritz. About 5.5 hours into the cook. We're 178 on the point and 153 on the 178 on the flat and 153 on the point. It's looking good. Okay, so we're 6 hours into the cook, and the flat is 192, the point is 162. So the flat is right at 199. A little higher than I wanted, and the point is 168. So it's time to get it and to wrap it. So the brisket has been on the grill for about almost 10 hours. And the flat and the point are both right at 203. So the brisket is off, and I usually like to take a dial thermometer and test it for a couple of things. Number one, tenderness, and number two, temperature. So it's been 3 hours in the proofer. Now it comes out. So this is what